23 days. That's the number that matters. Not the months in the camp or the miles of jungle. 23. The gap between the 2 weeks I promised 5 men they had to wait for rescue, and the reality of fighting my own command from the safety of a desk in Calcutta. You think the story of a prisoner of war is about escape. It isn't. Getting out was the easy part. The real war began when I had to fight men in my own uniform, men for whom the lives of my soldiers were an inconvenience, a matter of unauthorized paperwork. The greatest enemy isn't the man with the bayonet. It's the man with the teacup and the time to spare. You came to this channel because you know these accounts are vital. They are the receipts for promises kept and broken. Stay and subscribe. Don't do it for the algorithm. Do it for the record. Help us ensure these voices are never again lost in the filing cabinet of history. The order wasn't to retreat. It was to hold the line. We were cleaning rifles for a counterattack on the Jurong Road, oiling the bolts, checking the sight lines. The air still tasted of cordite, thick and metallic. Then the runner came, not running, just walking. A slow, shambling walk that told you everything before he opened his mouth. "It's over," he said. "General Percival signed it an hour ago. Lay down arms." Just like that. The noise stopped. For days it had been nothing but artillery, ours and theirs, a constant, deafening argument. Now, silence. A silence so loud it hurt the ears. And then a new sound, the clatter of Lee Enfields being stacked in neat, useless piles, the sound of a machine grinding to a halt. My platoon sergeant looked at me, his eyes asking a question I couldn't answer. I was an officer. I was supposed to know. But my authority had evaporated with the smoke. Then came the march. They put us in a column miles long, 130,000 of us, shuffling towards the Changi Peninsula. The sun was a hammer. The guards weren't brutal, not yet. They were just efficient. Small men, chattering in a language that was like birdsong but sharp. Impossible to read, impossible to anticipate. You learn to read a man, his posture, the way he holds his weapon. But we couldn't read these men, and that was its own kind of terror. The real enemy on that road was the smell of fear, of unwashed bodies, the smell of an army that had ceased to be an army and was now just a herd. I saw them pull officers out of the line, a captain, a major, for a quick beating, an example. My pips felt like they were burning through the fabric of my shirt. I reached up and turned my collar, tugged it closed. In that moment, I stopped being Lieutenant Baverstock. Survival meant being nobody. Just another ghost in a long line of ghosts, dust kicking up around my boots. We walked for 2 days. The end wasn't a wall or a fortress. It was a set of barracks. Selarang. I knew the place. We'd used it for training exercises. As we got closer, I heard a sound I recognized, the scrape and drag of a heavy gate. And then I saw them. Our own engineers, Royal Engineers. Men I'd shared a mess table with a week before. They were stringing the barbed wire. Their faces were blank, hammered into masks I didn't recognize. They were unspooling the wire that would cage us in. That was the moment. Not the signature on a document I never saw, not the shouting of a guard. It was the sight of a British soldier methodically building his own prison. That's when I understood. This wasn't about capture. It was about logistics. We were no longer soldiers. We were a resource pool, and this was our depot. They moved us north. By train, packed 100 men to a cattle car. The journey took days. The destination had a name, Konyu, but we called it Hellfire Pass. It was a cutting, a narrow slice through a mountain of limestone and bamboo. The plan was to build a railway through it. Our job was to be the machinery, 16 hours a day. One man holding a steel drill, 2 men swinging hammers. The Japanese engineers had a word for us, romusha, laborer. The guards just had one word, speedo, speedo, faster. The first few days you try to work, you try to be a soldier. Then you learn. You learn that one swing too hard is a spoonful of rice you can't replace. You learn to make the movements look right, the grunt, the strain in the shoulders, but you hold back 20%, 30%. It's a physical lie, told with muscle and sweat, just to see the sun rise one more time. The air was the worst part, not the heat, the dust. Powder-fine limestone that coated your throat, your lungs. You didn't breathe it, you drank it. At night, you'd cough, and a little cloud of white would fill the air in front of your face. Then the rains came, and with them the cholera. It turned the camp from a labor pool into a morgue. The smell, sharp, foul. The smell of life pouring out of a man. We had one medical orderly, a boy from the RAMC. He had nothing, no medicine, just a single bucket for boiling water. And I had to choose. My training says you save the man most likely to return to the line. But there was no line. There were just bodies, some still breathing. Do you give the water to the man who is delirious, but whose heart is still strong? Or the boy who is lucid, but fading? I was an officer. My job was to make decisions. But this wasn't command. This was curation, managing an inventory of the dying. I gave a spoonful to a private named Miller. I have no idea why. He had a strong jaw, that was it. He lived. The man next to him didn't. I learned then that a leader's choice and a God's choice look terribly alike when you're standing in hell. The moment I truly broke wasn't from a beating. It was a quiet Tuesday. I was watching a Japanese engineer, an officer like me. He was inspecting a section of track we had just laid. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't a monster. He was disappointed. He pulled out a pair of brass calipers and a leather-bound notebook. His hands were clean. He knelt, checking the alignment, and shook his head with the weary sigh of a professional dealing with shoddy work. And in that moment I saw it. He and I were the same man. His problem was a railway behind schedule. My problem was how to keep 12 men in my hut alive until morning. We were both just solving a logistical problem. The absurdity of it, the pure crystalline insanity. I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat. I had to choke it down, turn it into a cough. A laugh would have been a death sentence, but it was there, and the shame of it burns to this day, because in that one clear second, I understood him, and I hated myself for it. That night, something shifted. The routine of survival wasn't enough. Lying on the bamboo slat, listening to the jungle, I stopped thinking about the next sunrise. I started looking for a flaw in the design. I was no longer a prisoner. I was an officer again, planning an operation, and my target was the camp itself. The flaw in the design wasn't complicated. It was a man, and it was a schedule. Every Thursday, an hour before dusk, a diesel barge came up the Mae Klong. It brought supplies, rice, tools, cigarettes for the guards, and for the sergeant they called Kaeru, the frog. It brought a bottle of sake. For 1 hour, as the sun went down, he would sit on an empty crate by the riverbank and drink. In that hour, he was useless. It was a pattern, and a pattern is a vulnerability. I watched it for 3 weeks. The low thrum of the engine became the only sound that mattered. The smell of the river, not the camp rot, but clean mud and green growing things. It was the smell of a road. This wasn't hope. Hope is a beggar's coin. This was a tactical problem. For the first time in a year, I felt the old instincts click into place. I wasn't a prisoner planning an escape. I was an officer planning an operation. There were 8 men in my hut I trusted. 8 men who still had the light of defiance in their eyes. One night, I gathered them. The lamp was a piece of rag and a tin of pig fat. It threw shadows that made skeletons of us all. I told them about the barge, the guard, the hour of grace. I saw the flicker of life in their eyes, a dangerous, fragile thing. Then I told them the rest. "There's room for 3, I said. Myself and 2 more. The silence that followed was heavier than the humid air. It was a physical weight. The hope didn't just die. It curdled into something else. The terrible arithmetic of the camp. 8 into 2. I looked at them. Noonan, his hands always trembling from the malaria. Webb, a boy of 19 who coughed blood in the mornings. Slade, Cullen, Ashworth. I could see them doing the math in their heads, weighing their own chances, weighing each other. This is the part that doesn't go in the report. My choice had nothing to do with who deserved it. Deserve has no currency in that place. I couldn't choose the sick. They wouldn't survive the jungle. I couldn't choose the men with wives and children. Their hearts weren't clear for what had to be done. It was a cold, brutal calculation. The same kind of calculation an engineer makes about a load-bearing wall. Miller, I said. Davies. They were the fittest, unmarried. They nodded once. No triumph in their eyes. They understood the math. Then I turned to the other 5, to Slade and Webb and the rest. This was the hard part, the necessary part. I knelt in front of them. I looked each man in the eye. I put my hand on Gordon Slade's shoulder. It felt like a bundle of sticks. 2 weeks, I said. My voice was quiet, but it filled the hut. I give you my word. I will be back with a patrol in 2 weeks. It wasn't a lie. In that moment, I believed it with every fiber of my being. But I knew what it was. It was a tool, a weapon. It was the promise you make to keep men from giving up, to keep them from turning on each other. It was a field dressing applied to a mortal wound, meant to hold a man together just long enough. They didn't say anything. They just stared at me. They weren't hearing a plan. They were accepting a sacrament. The choice was made. The word was given. And in the silence of that hut, listening to the jungle breathe outside, I did not know if I had just saved 3 men or damned 5. The jungle was worse than the camp. In the camp, the enemy had a face. Here, it was the air itself, the wet, clinging heat, the leeches that you burned off at night, leaving bleeding circles on your skin. The sound, a constant, high-frequency hum that got into your teeth. On the 3rd day, we lost Davies. No fight, no snake bite, just a fever that came on at dusk and took him before dawn. We didn't bury him. We just kept moving, Miller and I. We weren't soldiers anymore. We were animals, following a scent on the wind, the scent of our own lines. We made it. 9 days after jumping from that barge, we stumbled into a British patrol, and the real war began. They sent me to Calcutta, to a clean room in Fort William with a fan that turned slowly on the ceiling. A major with a neat moustache and polished buttons sat opposite me. He pushed a cup of tea across the desk. The clink of the porcelain against the saucer was the loudest, most violent sound I'd ever heard. "Start from the beginning, Lieutenant," he said. I told him. The camp, the railway, the men, the barge, the promise. 2 weeks. I looked at the calendar on his wall. 10 days had already passed. He listened. He nodded. He made notes. Then he started asking questions, not about the men, about procedure. Did I have written confirmation of the guard's schedule? Could I provide a precise grid reference for the camp, not just a description? He spoke of unauthorized actions and strategic priorities. Every question was a day lost. Every form he pushed in front of me was a shovelful of dirt on the graves of my men. I was fighting for their lives, and he was fighting to keep his paperwork tidy. It took 23 days. 23 days to get a patrol authorized, to get them supplied, to get them to the camp. They found it empty. The Japanese had moved everyone 2 days before. Noonan, Webb, Cullen, Ashworth, gone. Vanished into the system. Years later, the war was over. I was home, rebuilding a life. Then a knock on the door. It was Gordon Slade. He was thin, but he was alive. He'd survived another camp and another. He stood on my doorstep in the quiet English sunshine. My wife's roses were in bloom. He didn't look angry. His eyes were just empty. He didn't ask about the jungle or Miller or how we got out. He only had one question. 2 weeks, you said. Why, sir? Why did it take 23 days? I could have told him. I could have explained the major, the paperwork, the strategic priorities, the chain of command. I could have laid out the entire, logical, defensible reason for every single lost day. But standing there, looking into his eyes, I understood. The logic was just noise. He hadn't heard a plan. He'd heard a promise. I survived the camp. I survived the jungle. I survived the war. But the man who gave his word on that bamboo floor, he's still there, in that hut, counting the days. I got out. He never did.